Hello, Weather Impact Meteorologist Gary Frank here with an update on our severe weather that we've had. And I want to talk specifically about what happened on Wednesday. It's one of those things where so oftentimes you hear one of us, myself or Scott, Jim, Tracy, talking about severe weather and outlooks from the Storm Prediction Center, outlooks from what the National Weather Service say, and obviously our outlook as well. We're all going to have a different take on things. It doesn't matter who you talk to, whether or not you're looking at our app, someone else's app, or just the National Weather Service. But we all kind of work under the same umbrella, and then we figure it out from there. And those are the things that we look at when we try to find ingredients for severe weather. And our main message, and especially my main message on Wednesday morning, was the fact that we had the potential for some heavier rain, some stronger storms, but not certainly a tornado. So where did we get that from? And let's analyze the radar and talk about some of the things that led up to that and try to explain it the best way that we can here. So I want to talk about this in a sense that, let's look at this looping radar here as I put on this full screen, and I can do some things with it. First and foremost, let's start it with where we were yesterday morning at this time. It was 9:30 in the morning. It was raining. We had a pretty steady line of rain, even as I zoom in. And, you know, temperatures worked their way up into the 70s. And the main story was the fact that we were going to get enough breaks where I did not think we were going to see a significant amount of flooding, which really ended up being the case. But the fact that we had breaks allowed us to warm up a little bit more as well. And then, of course, by 12:15, you see a few of these storms developing along this front, which is what we discussed throughout the day. So far, no problems. That's kind of similar to what we expected. But by 1 or 2 o'clock, a line of storms started to develop, and specifically by about 2 o'clock. And this is where I want to zoom in just a little bit more. And you'll see that some of these spots ahead of the front up to 78 degrees, 77, 78. So that was ample warming. So we got 3, 4, 5 degrees warmer here at that point. And even as I take that plot off and put some of the cities on, and you can see specifically, this is the storm system that worked its way through Washington, Augusta, and even as we follow along with some of our emergency management partners looking at some of the reporting stations, this particular storm right here, this was the one that eventually turned into a tornado. But as we followed along, not only looking at our radar, which is all the same the one that the National Weather Service and Storm Prediction Center are looking at, you know, we're still looking at this storm system going, okay, well, the ingredients aren't in place at this point to produce a tornado. And I want to take you to where some of the Storm Prediction Center that we look at, some of the outlooks, right? We're familiar with the marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, and then of course high risk when we talk about category 1 through 5. I want to talk about where we were at the start of the day. And let's show you the archives from this, because this is where we were in terms of our severe weather risk, right? You look at a good majority of the area under a marginal risk for severe weather. And I put this in, this in play. This is from yesterday at 6, this is from yesterday morning. Right? So this was our first outlook of the day regarding severe potential. And I'll show you this again. But when you look at that from a standpoint of a marginal risk for severe weather, we don't really think about that as producing a tornado most of the time. And we don't really look at it as the most serious one. In fact, there are times where myself or other members of the Weather Impact team here show you this and go, well, this is not a significant risk because A, B, and C, right? These are storms that may have the capability to be severe, but if we were going to think about them in terms of impacts, you're looking at maybe 40 to 60 mile an hour wind, not a tornado. But when you look at it from this standpoint here, I even show you some of those impacts also when we break it down on a day 1 category from the Storm Prediction Center. Sometimes we'll even get to the point where, you can look at tornado, wind, and hail, and I'll show you those percentages, right? Let me pan down a little bit for you. Let's look at where the tornado risk was. That was the first part of the day, right? This is in New Mexico and Texas, right? That's where the one area of a tornado risk was that was forecast at 6 a.m. So the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, saying the same thing, right? Like, we're looking at the same thing going, okay, well, it's a little cooler. We got plenty of moisture, but we don't have the instability and some of the other ingredients for a tornado, right? I want to show you the same thing. I want to look at the next one. This is the one that was at 1 o'clock. Timestamp that once again. This one is at 1 o'clock. Let's look at this again, and I'll zoom in. This is the one that is issued at 1 o'clock. This is exactly an hour and 30 minutes before that storm started to develop, and exactly 2 hours before we saw our first tornado warning or an hour and a half before we saw our first tornado warning, and 2 hours before the tornadic debris signature was confirmed on radar. So you're saying the Storm Prediction Center is looking at these things and they don't see the ingredients in place to have us under any tornado risk at the same time. And this is an hour and a half, 2 hours. So that's what I'm saying. If they are looking at it and our local weather service office is saying that, then we're pretty much not going to be in a tornado risk, right? Well, like I said, then things start to change and you start to see these storms. And so I want to zoom in where you can see that specifically. Once again, we're under that marginal risk, and I zoom in just a little bit more so I can pan across, and you can see that we're under that tornado risk, or we're under that marginal risk for severe weather. That's category 1 of 5 from the Storm Prediction Center. Now let's get back to this, because this is where we saw 2 storms, and as we're following along with our partners in the National Weather Service and seeing what their thoughts are on this storm, right now they don't look to be particularly ominous at 1:45. And they're talking about how this storm ahead is looking to merge with this one right here. And that's where we zoom in right about here. As we get to about 2:15, we start to see how that storm is settling in together. And their point is, this storm here is merging with this one here and saying, well, you know, normally when we're getting on and tracking some of these things for you on radar, we see a straight edge like this, where right about here at 2:30, and we go, well, that looks pretty ominous, doesn't it? And the way that these storms merged essentially pushed them together, created enough energy interacting with the more stable air that we, or the more unstable air that we had ahead of it, because temperatures got into the upper 70s there. The atmosphere wasn't worked over with rain quite as much, as I kind of even rewind this, right? And you know, you had a pretty good break in this area. By 10:15, there was no rain, right? You know, we got a pretty solid break of about 4 hours here, or we didn't have much. And then all of a sudden, that storm motion pushed in, and there was enough twisting at the leading edge to produce that. And that's where I can zoom in here, and I'll put this on a full screen for you so you can see this a little bit better. I just wanted to point out where those 2 storms were merging, because as we started to get closer to that 2:30 time frame, and I'll loop this on a different product here, that's the area right about here. That's where we saw our first. So essentially we saw the tornado develop right about there, or think about it. That's where it started to get a little bit more ominous. And as it got closer to Wildwood, over St. Albans Road, and all the way into 100, that's where we saw our first tornado warning. And then eventually, of course, damage at 109, right across Chesterfield Airport, and right across the road there. And that's where you saw that. Eventually it surged out, and we lost that area. But I want to show you a couple of spots here, and I'm going to loop this here first and foremost so you can see just how this developed as it worked its way toward the radar. And I looped this a little bit, and this is our Doppler radar from yesterday. This is a different product, one that we would use in that sense. Let's pause this here. You can see that right about there. 94 Wildwood, you'll start to see that little bow out there that's almost in a comma shape here. That starts to turn in there. That's where we saw that leading edge create that little bit of spin south of Chesterfield as it runs in closer to the radar in Weldon Spring. That's where the tornado was likely to occur. We have at least 1 confirmed tornado, if not 2. And then, of course, it worked its way to the airport. You can see that it became a big, wide area of rain, but it also weakened as well. Now I want to put on this velocity product so you can find where this couplet was specifically. I'll pull this out for me just a second, so as I let this loop, you can see where we had this little brief from 109 right across Strecker into Chesterfield Farms, into the estates there, crossing 64, all the way up into 364 Maryland Heights, and that's when it started to lose its signature that way. But that's what I wanted to point out, and I want to show you this here from that perspective here. Is I'll just pause this a little bit more, and you can see this signature a little bit more here. From, of course, 109 right there, you'll see that right over 109 right there, 253, 254. This was very quick, 255 into Chesterfield. That caused damage there. Then all the way to 304. That's where you still saw that right across 64. And then eventually across 364 into Creve-Coeur Mill. And then it was gone. And that was it, right? So that was the main thing for us. And then you look at, if I just loop this here, and you look at the time lapse here, even at the airport, we had some, it was a burst of rain. You didn't see this. This was not something that you could go out and see, where you saw the burst of rain here coming in at the airport. That was essentially what we had to deal with in terms of our radar loop. So like I said, you'll see that eventually loops. Look how dark it gets. That's the storm that moved in. It was not rotating at that time, and then eventually pushed out of the area. But like I said, when it came to the fact that these two storms merged that way, that's how we saw a localized tornado threat. There was also some messaging from the Storm Prediction Center about right after that they issued that first outlook at 1 o'clock, and I'll share that with you here in the text portion of this. But the reality is, this is why we try to keep you prepared for some of these things, and even as much as we can prepare you, all these little localized ingredients, storm mergers, always have a mind of their own in some cases. And so that's why sometimes the bottom line to take away from this is stay prepared. We'll try to keep you up to date as much as we can, but that's why it's always important, even as we get into the world of AI and things like that, because all of these processes that go on locally at the atmosphere still can't be determined by some of the smartest people that follow this stuff nonstop, because it seems like, some things are a sure thing and then they don't happen, and some things don't think they're going to happen and then they do. And that's the way weather is, seemingly unpredictable, but predictable at the same time. So that's why we continue to look at some of these things at great length. That's why we bring these weather impact alert days to try to prepare you for some of these things, and then they don't happen. And it's a give and take. So we're always aware of this, and I know that there's a lot of tornado anxiety that we have here at this point. But like I said, these are the reasons that we try to pinpoint, stay on with you, stay on the air, stay on 5+ with all of these things to try to give you an idea of where these areas of rotation could be and why we want you to take these tornado warnings seriously so many times. Because sometimes, very quickly, within a 5-minute period, we can get a 90-mile-an-hour wind. And that's what we likely had with this. The National Weather Service will continue to survey that, and we'll bring you the latest. But wanted to kind of give you a synopsis of why seemingly we had no tornado watch, severe thunderstorm watch, or even severe thunderstorm warning. And I've seen that happen to me before too, where it doesn't feel like one of those tornado type days. We've had that in Kansas City, and all of a sudden you get these brief tornadoes that cause damage. That's what happened here. It can happen. We hope that it doesn't happen, and we try to give you as much warning as possible. But that's what ended up happening. And like I said, we have multiple risks this weekend as well on the low end side, but it's a marginal risk, and you just saw what happened when we were at a marginal risk. So we'll keep you posted on those updates here, and I'll attach this to a story where I'll show you some of the text from the Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center as well, and we'll keep you posted throughout the weekend.